Is a secret Pentagon power play about to push Spain to the edge of NATO? Could saying no to Trump's Iran war one day cost US allies their NATO seats? As Washington weighs action against its own partners, is NATO facing its biggest crisis yet? From Spain to the UK, the US is now floating sanctions on allies who blocked bases and Iran operations. While the US was busy intercepting Iran's oil tankers on the high seas, a quieter battle was unfolding inside Washington, where the Pentagon was mapping out ways to punish its own NATO allies. Rising tensions within the alliance are now exposing deep cracks over how far European partners are willing to go in backing recent US military operations. An internal Pentagon email, seen by officials, laid out a menu of options to penalize countries viewed as uncooperative or hesitant during the Iran war. These proposals reflect growing frustration in Washington with NATO members that declined to fully support US and Israeli actions against Iran. According to one US official, some allies went so far as to refuse access to their territory, deny the use of bases, and even block overflight rights for key military operations. In the email, these permissions, known in military jargon as ABO, or access, basing, and overflight, were described as the bare minimum that NATO members are expected to provide. One of the most dramatic options discussed, according to reports, was the idea of suspending Spain from the alliance over its stance during the conflict. Other suggested measures included quietly sidelining so-called difficult countries by blocking them from holding key or prestigious posts within NATO's command structure. In a striking twist, the memo also floated the idea of revisiting the US position on the Falkland Islands, a move that would carry clear diplomatic pressure for the United Kingdom. The document was circulated among senior civilian and military officials, underlining that these ideas were being considered at the highest levels of the Pentagon. However, the email stopped short of proposing a full US withdrawal from NATO, or the closure of major American bases across Europe. Officials, when pressed, declined to say whether a partial reduction of US forces on the continent was among the options being quietly weighed behind closed doors. Kingsley Wilson said, and I quote, "As President Trump has said, despite everything that the United States has done for our NATO allies, they were not there for us. The War Department will ensure that the President has credible options to ensure that our allies are no longer a paper tiger and instead do their part. We have no further comment on any internal deliberations to that effect," unquote. This is more than a line in a memo, it's a clear squeeze on Britain, signaling that even America's oldest ally isn't safe from diplomatic pressure when it refuses to fall in line. Despite the extension of the US-Iran truce, the maritime standoff between the two sides has intensified further, with American forces now seizing Iranian-linked tankers well beyond the Strait of Hormuz. On April 23, the US military seized a large crude carrier, MT Majestic, carrying Iranian crude in the Indian Ocean, marking one of the most significant intercepts of the Shadow Fleet campaign. US Attorney Jeanine Pirro stated that the seized ship, MT Majestic, carried approximately 1.9 million barrels of Iranian oil, reflecting the scale of Iran's maritime export network. Pirro also noted that the similarly seized tanker MT Tafani, taken earlier in the week, also carried roughly 1.9 million barrels of Iranian crude, underscoring a pattern of high-volume captures. The location of the Majestic seizure was close to where the Tafani was boarded earlier in the Indian Ocean, suggesting that US forces are focusing on a specific corridor used by Iran-linked tankers. Pirro added that her office has executed some of the nation's most complex seizure warrants, positioning these operations within a broader legal framework for targeting sanctions-busting vessels. The attorney also hinted at the earlier seizure of oil tankers carrying Venezuelan crude, including the ship's skipper, Bella 1, and Veronica. The US Department of War justified the operation as an effort to intercept ships that are alleged to be violating sanctions and supporting Iran's war-related revenue flows. These seizures form part of a wider American crackdown on Iran's so-called Shadow Fleet, a network of tankers that operate under false flags or limited identification to evade scrutiny. The broader aim is to squeeze Iran's oil revenues, which have long served as a critical source of funding for Tehran's military programs and regional activities. The US military has claimed that its blockade and interdiction measures have so far forced at least 33 ships to turn back or return to port while attempting to navigate the Strait of Hormuz area. The latest seizure of the Majestic came shortly after President Trump claimed total US control of the Strait of Hormuz and issued shoot-and-kill orders against vessels ignoring the blockade. Donald Trump said, and I quote, "Iran is having a very hard time figuring out who their leader is. They just don't know. The infighting is between the hardliners, who have been losing badly on the battlefield, and the moderates, who are not very moderate at all, but gaining respect. is crazy. We have total control over the Strait of Hormuz. No ship can enter or leave without the approval of the United States Navy. It is sealed up tight, until such time as Iran is able to make a deal." Unquote. The US military's claim that it would not allow Iranian ships to transit through the Hormuz Strait has been sharply contradicted, as new reports suggest that multiple Iranian-linked vessels have in fact passed through these strategic waters. Maritime intelligence agency Lloyd's List has asserted that dozens of Iranian ships have successfully crossed the Hormuz Strait, undermining Washington's narrative of a tight and impenetrable blockade. Data compiled by Lloyd's List, and reported by the outlet Iran International on April 20 ahead of the truce's expiry, paints a very different picture from US military briefings and official statements. At least 26 ships connected to Iran's so-called Shadow Fleet are reported to have bypassed the US blockade on Tehran's ports, slipping through the cracks of enforcement and continuing their journeys. The report cited vessel tracking data that showed continued tanker movements tied to Iranian trade, indicating that energy shipments and commercial routes have remained active despite public claims of severe restrictions. Several oil and gas tankers carrying Iranian energy exports are said to have departed the Gulf despite the curbs, suggesting that Iran's export lifelines are far from completely severed. Iran's Shadow Fleet is described as a network of aging or lightly regulated ships specifically used to evade international sanctions and keep vital oil and gas revenues flowing. These ships typically operate with obscured ownership structures and masked tracking data to move oil and gas under the radar, making it difficult for authorities to monitor, intercept, or halt their activities.
$25 करोड़ गरीब गरीबी को परास्त करके बाहर निकले।
For the good of our nation, let's work together and let's truly make America great again.
The fastest news breaks.
Requested PM saying that we will have to speak to Putin and to Zelensky.
The biggest news makers.
The relationship with India is probably the most important bilateral relationship the U.S. will have for the rest of this century.
The capital delivered quite an election result today.
Expert analysis.
The million-dollar question today is how to stop this dance of death.
Ground reports.
I'm standing at the crossroad of the Kumbh Mela. Behind me are more than 100 entry guards.
Long-form interviews.
Exclusionary politics is reflected in Manipur case as well. You don't bother because this is a small state.
Deep dive into burning issues.
It's often said DRC could be the richest country in the whole world. It's because of what sits underneath.
Why exactly did the US topple the Sheikh Hasina government?
HT videos. We don't just break news, we break it down.